want to assume that yes, thank you. I don't want to assume that everybody knows what virtual reality is, so I will quickly do a quick overview of what virtual reality is and what it isn't, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of what we're talking about. Then I will go into a little bit more about why VR. We always ask this question each time we have a VR project. Will it add value, or are we just using it for a gimmick? So why VR, looking at the benefits of VR and what it brings to learning experiences. We'll look at a couple of case studies. I have a million that I could talk about, and I could talk for hours, and I will need Anna to tell me when I'm going over time, but I'll try to keep to time. But I'll share two particular examples in this session today. And then I'll share a couple of challenges. I'm also keen to hear about your challenges or your case studies if you've worked with VR before. So please do interrupt if you have a question, pop your hand up, pop something in the chat, and we'll monitor that as we go through. And then finally, a couple of recommendations to get started, to start experiencing a bit of VR and see how you can get started in your organization, or how you can just learn about the topic in a bit more detail. So that's the plan. Before we get to the detail, I wanted to share a quick poll with you. If I open this up, I'm just interested in what your experience with VR is. I know some of you are familiar with VR because I can see some familiar faces and names. And I'm just keen to hear, okay, just tried it once or twice, tried it a couple of times, never tried it, okay. Nobody has a headset then. Interesting. Okay, cool. So I think we have the winning one is around just tried it once or twice. And a couple of you that never tried it but would like to. I'm glad to see that nobody wants to steer away from it, so that's great. I'll just share the results as well so you can see it pop on the screen. And then I've got a second question for you around what do you think about VR in learning, incorporating virtual reality in learning? So let's move it to the second poll. And be honest, it's anonymous. I'm just keen to hear what, do you think it would add value? Do you think it's a gimmick? Do you think it doesn't work? Are you curious? Is it too expensive, or is it too new? We're not ready yet. Are we kind of past it? Everybody talks about AI, ChatGPT. Who cares about VR? I hope you do care, but I get it. Okay, so you're not sure, but you're curious. Okay, too expensive or too new? Okay, a bit of a mix. Yeah, that's why we're here. Okay, cool. And nobody's already using it. Okay, so good. Good. So I'll end the poll, share that as well on the screen. And I will go back to my slides. So the reason I asked, I just wanted to check in because, especially for my first slide, and it's good to know that some of you have a little or limited experience with virtual reality, which means that this slide will come in handy in terms of defining what VR is. So I think it's helpful defining it, especially looking at what it's not, and to make sure that we don't confuse other terminology like MR, mixed reality, AR, augmented reality, and the metaverse. So firstly, the metaverse is an interesting one because it is something that you can do in virtual reality, and it's a contested term in the industry. People that work in virtual reality don't like that term. They say that Meta's ruined it for everyone, but it was used way long before Meta even introduced it. But the main point about metaverse is that you are in a social environment. You bring your own avatar, you're live in another environment. You might go to a concert, and it's in an environment that you can have on desktop or in a headset. So that's what the metaverse is. But virtual reality specifically can be social, but can also be self-led and not include avatars. The mixed reality part, that's something that's coming, well, I just ordered a new Meta Quest free headset I received yesterday, and it incorporates a lot of mixed reality. So this is where you can see your real environment, but you're incorporated computer-generated assets or items in your real world. So this is an example in engineering. It's used a lot for cars, engineering, mechanics, and also to work with people abroad in remote teams and to compare models and prototypes in using mixed reality. Augmented reality, Pokemon Go is a common one. Amazon use it, so you can use your phone to see if that chair that you want to buy will look good in your living room, if that TV that you want to buy will fit in your living room. So that's what augmented reality is. And AI, this didn't used to be something that I had to define with this, but because it is the new cool thing that everybody talks about, during the pandemic, we had the metaverse, virtual reality, everybody was talking about it, and then ChatGPT came along and ruined it for us, because now that's all everybody talks about. I say ruined it, it didn't, because AI does not equate ChatGPT. ChatGPT uses AI, and in virtual reality, we've used AI in the past and we still do. We probably don't use ChatGPT that often, and I'm probably one of those few people that doesn't really like it, but that's for another time. So not to be confused with what virtual reality is. And virtual reality, you're completely immersed in an environment. You can't see your outside environment, so you have to be careful in where you place yourself and what your external environment where you do VR. You have controllers. Here is an old version, actually, that picture that I've got here, but it's a typical training picture because you've got a screen showing you what the person is experiencing. With tech that we have at the moment, it's as small as this. You have a headset. It's tiny, but I say it's tiny. It's not glasses, but it completely immerses you in environment. And then you have two controllers to engage with your environment. Okay, so hopefully those definitions help. And one thing that I wanted to point out as well is the VR's progression. So if you have seen VR used in the past, or if you've seen it in arcades, for example, there's always been a lot of equipment used. And this, for example, this is when we first started in 2017, but this is a picture from 2018 where we first started using virtual reality. We had to have 4 cameras, sensor cameras. We had to measure out an environment. We had this hefty computer, we had cables to make sure you shouldn't walk on the cables, to trip over them. We had this massive black screen to make sure that we didn't get any glares from the windows. It was a bit stressful to set up. And now, not only is it way more affordable, but you can easily set it up in 2 seconds. I've got a little marker on the floor to know where the center is. I've got a headset, 2 controllers, done. So I think that's worth pointing out because it was a bit of a challenge beforehand, and it is so much more accessible than it used to be, and affordable. Okay, so why VR? I'll go through a couple of reasons and the benefits of VR and where it can add value. And I'm also, whether you have experience in VR or not, I'm also intrigued to hear what reasons or where you could see it adding value. So examples or what benefits you could see VR having in learning experiences or in a learning context. So the first one to share, which is probably one that feels maybe obvious, that you can recreate scenarios that are expensive, difficult, and dangerous to recreate. So in medical training, it's used a lot for surgery, for example. It's better to practice in VR than on a person. Health and safety, a lot of organizations use it for health and safety reasons to make sure that if they do make mistakes, they make it in VR as opposed to in real life and cause serious injury. And then presenting presentations, preparing for a TED Talk, auditorium, Dragon's Den, Shark Tank, talk show, whatever it may be, you can create those environments in VR, which would be pretty expensive or difficult to get whole people to be your fake audience, to rent an auditorium to practice your presentation. So it's a safe space to make mistakes, and it feels so real, which is my next point, because it's so immersive and you're really in that environment. It tricks your brain to think that you're there. One interesting study that I found out was they use it for people that have had 3rd-degree burns, and they put you in a cold environment in VR. They don't change the temperature in the room, but it tricks your brain to think that you're in a cold space, and it lowers your body temperature. So they use it to manage those types of symptoms, which is quite phenomenal. Authentic behavior comes out through VR, again, linked to that immersiveness. You forget that you might have people around you watching you, observing you, which is something that we do in a coaching context or for senior leader development, which is really interesting when you're trying to raise your self-awareness and understand your reactions to different stimulus. Experiential learning, you're doing it. You've got controllers, but you do feel like you're touching things, that you're moving things around. I mean, just the other day I was on the beach in VR, and I was worried about wetting my feet because I had my shoes on. I didn't take my shoes off, and even touching things that I'm picking up with a controller. I'm pressing a button, but I'm thinking, oh no, I just wet my hand because I've not dried. You know, you just, then you kind of reason with yourself, but just for a split second you think, oh god, I've forgotten to take my shoes off. So yeah, so that goes to the immersiveness, the experiential learning, and that supports retention. When you're doing something, we all know that you remember it more. So that's another benefit and an important point with VR. The focus, no distractions. You can't see your phone, you can't see your emails. That also plays to the retention piece. And then finally, this is one where a lot of research has been done, especially I think it was the Walmart case study where they trained their employers to build their empathy with virtual reality. It has a quicker impact. The training was a 3-day training or something quite long, and they managed to compact it in 45 minutes in virtual reality. So because of the intensity, because of the immersiveness, you tend to learn things quicker, and it has a bigger impact quicker.
Lucy, we have in the meantime a couple people interested in the chat. I think you will cover this, but just so you are aware, what kind of cameras are required? If they're special cameras, how do we capture in VR? So just keep a bigger focus on that maybe, since there's some questions there.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Christopher, I might need to know a bit more about your question, because I don't know if you mean the cameras that we used to use that we don't anymore. So I won't be able to tell you what brand or what they were. They were like sensor cameras. But in VR, you can take pictures or screen recordings once you're in VR, if that's what you're asking. I'm not too sure.
No, is this a good time to answer, or am I interrupting?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Well, I come from the motion picture industry before I got into instructional design, so I'm used to state-of-the-art cameras. But I moved out before VR really took off, and so I'm just wondering, is it a 360 camera that you're typically recording with? They're not your standard motion picture cameras, I'm assuming, your high-end video cameras.
Yes, so we do. So one of the examples, which I'll share in a second, that we had with EY, we had a 360 camera to film a 360 meeting. We use it if we are filming environments like a meeting that we want to replicate, or a discussion or something like that. We don't, to be honest, but we don't use it that often, because typically our clients, or when we work on certain projects, we want to use the magic of VR, and we create environments that are in space, in Rome, in Egypt, and then we have activities that will show certain types of behaviors, or we might be looking at certain strengths. But yeah, a lot of the time, if we do film it, we'll use a 360 camera.
So otherwise it would be animation, what you're referring to, if you're recreating a location?
We would be using Unreal. So we use Unreal as a game engine to develop them. Unity is another one. And typically it will depend. Sometimes we'll have the developers draw up something from scratch, or we will buy already made environments that we will edit. That makes sense. Cool. Thank you for your question. Lucy, will you talk also about the equipment? I wasn't going to, but I can. Unreal, Unity. Yep, cool. Thank you. So I'll probably come back to the equipment in the challenges, because I'll talk about hardware a little bit in the challenges. So I'll keep that one for a bit later. So a bit of a bold statement, but I like to think that the future of work is immersive. I do think it will. I think, or I hope that it will become mainstream. I think the more we use it and the more we see the impact, that's why I'm really keen in getting everyone to experience it. I love doing demos. I love sharing the magic or the potential of VR. So I am hoping that it will become mainstream. I do think that organizations are starting to see it as, I mean, we went through some of the benefits, but also using it as their competitive advantage as well. So we see it in recruitment, we see it in attraction, to attract talent. Look at our brand, we're forward thinking, we use cutting edge technology, but also to prepare their workforce. If you think about the skills gap, particularly, there's skills like, well, the soft skills, the majority of the skills that are in the skills gap are soft skills, and some of them are digital skills. And something that we're seeing when we're training soft skills particularly, we're also managing to tick that box around digital skills. And it's not necessarily learning that each organization or each person needs to know how to use VR, but because VR is probably on the extreme of that technology, it's not a new software that you're learning on the computer. It helps people become a bit more comfortable or change your mindset and your agility around learning new technology. So that's been an extra benefit that we've seen. This is a bit more, I won't go into a lot of detail. This was research done by PwC, showing the impact of virtual reality in VR. I have another example at the end of Stanford VR that also shares research, which both are really good. PwC, obviously, there's a bit more of a commercial angle to it. I do share it and I do use it because I do believe it, because we see the impact of it. So it's not to say that it's not good research, but there's maybe a bit more of a commercial angle. And I'll share another link later, which is a bit less commercial and really interesting research. But typically, the impact is phenomenal. Learn quicker, more confidence, competence goes up, and you're focused. Right, so a couple of case studies. I've got two specific examples where I'll go through the challenge, the solution, and the impact. And any questions that pop up, feel free to unmute, because those, well, you'll see. I think the interesting case studies, but both very different. So, oh, I can't move. Okay, so the first one is with EY. So I think most of you will be familiar with EY as an organization. They're a big consultancy. And their challenge was, we were working with the recruitment team specifically, but it is a learning / recruitment / attraction solution. They wanted to enhance their tech brands. They knew from surveys and rankings that their brand, that they were not seen, EY was not seen as very techy or had low scores. So that's one thing they wanted to enhance. And on top of that, they were looking to get more tech talent. And I think it's probably the same across the globe, but in the UK particularly, it's really difficult. Well, it's a competitive market to get good, skilled tech talent. So that was a challenge for them, to focus on the tech elements. And then the second element was to bridge the gap between interns and clients. So this goes to the 360 video element, where because of NDAs, because of confidentiality agreements as interns, because they aren't employees, they can't always shadow meetings or attend meetings. So this is why VR came in, and it's a perfect example of how you could immerse somebody in a meeting, because these interns are year 2, year 3 at university. They might have a bit of work experience, but not that much, and may have never attended a meeting. So they wanted to also prepare that talent, train them, develop them, so when they do work for the company, they're already ready. They've already experienced a meeting. They know how EY works, how they do their meetings, and they learn about the culture as well. So in comes VR. The VR internship of the future. And to be fair, it has been really popular. It has won a lot of awards. We started with a cohort of 20 last year, and this year we had 108 interns. So the organization bought headsets. They bought about 25 headsets, I think, to begin with. And each person was given a headset to take home, and they had a schedule to follow. So it was a blended solution. Week 1, they would do tutorials, acclimatize themselves to using the technology. Week 2, they would go in a 360 meeting. And it is really, it's difficult to explain unless you experience it, but you're in the meeting, they look at you and they say, oh, we've got an intern with us today. And they look at you, they look at the camera, but they look at you and you just feel like you're being spoken to by the clients and by the people on the project. So it's really cool. And then in VR, you get the opportunity to analyze the meeting. How was the meeting closed? How did it start? What's the main points that you gain from it? You have post-it notes that you can organize in the virtual reality as well. Then there's a couple of things that follow in terms of extra videos, extra content. You've got a cinema, you've got some games as well, and you have the opportunity to practice your presentation in virtual reality. So they send us their slides, we pop them into virtual reality, They go in as a group, they get feedback, they switch, they try again before they do a real presentation in real life, because we don't want to take that away. I think it's still important they will be doing presentations in real life, in person. It won't all be virtual, but to get the opportunity to practice in quite an intense environment before they do so. And then the impact, so this was from last year. The impact was great. We got feedback from the individuals in a kind of a forum way as well, where we asked them about their favorite parts, the parts that they least preferred. The one that came on top was the social interactions. I don't know if it's for this particular age group, but they loved being in multiplayer. They loved speaking to their colleagues or to their peers in virtual reality. And that's why this time round for this year, we brought in avatars and we brought in more multiplayer activities. And I've got a video afterwards to show you. Actually, I've got two videos. I'll share the YouTube link for this particular VR internship. Any questions on that one before I go on to the next?
I had one on because I never really saw it pan out in multiplayer scenario. So did that mean that you have to create an avatar? And I see, like, all of us, let's say there were 5 peers. Are we in the same physical room, or each and one of us is at home with our headset, but we log in at the same time in the same whatever environment, and then I see avatars, but then how do I hear what they say?
Yes, so you would be at home, I would be at home, we would agree, let's meet at 3 p.m. in this space. Depending on what you're joining, you'll have the information on what session you need to join, where you need to click, and then you're both in the same environment. You would have prepared your avatar beforehand, so that would have already been done, and then you just join the environment at that time. In the background, what we do, we have a server up. We use AWS from Amazon, and we have a server in the background to make sure that it's live and that you can hear me and we can talk to each other. Does that make sense?
The headset.
With the headsets, yeah.
Okay. Fun. Okay, thanks.
No worries. Any other questions? What is the latest?
Yeah, hi, I just typed it in. What is the latency like when you're using a group environment through a common server?
Well, it's actually okay. Like we've not had issues. We've had issues when, so in some organizations, they will block AWS because they think it's gaming, and then that just doesn't work. So sometimes we've had to use data, and so it's just based on the connection. Sometimes it's a bit iffy, but if you're what's worked the best is when they take it home, they're on their normal Wi-Fi and they have university Wi-Fi. They don't have the best Wi-Fi in the world necessarily, and we've not had any issues whatsoever. And because we can see them, we've got what we call a companion app. So when we launch a session, they all meet up in the session and we just check in to make sure that everybody's okay. And on our companion app, we can also talk to them. We have voice chats, and we always expected a bit of a lag, but I personally haven't noticed any sort of lag in terms of movement, in terms of speech, or so on. So far, so good. Any other questions or thoughts? Or I'll move on. Okay, I'll move on. Okay, so the next one is with a global law firm and work that we've done with senior leaders. So again, this is a blended solution. They were looking for a solution to support their high potential director level lawyers who had been identified as preparing, so not yet selected, but preparing for partnership. So for that program, they already had a bunch of people that they wanted to select for that. And the aim was to prepare them, to develop them at a stage they would be ready for partner selection. So senior leader development, they'd already done your typical type of development, workshops and so on. They were looking for something a bit different, experiential, and that would have an impact in the final selection process. And so in comes VR, but only for a little tiny bit of the program. So this is to represent how VR can come in as a tool. It doesn't have to be the whole experience. It can come into to facilitate something as part of a wider program. So this was a 6 months program. They had different interventions, role plays, they had workshops, they had 360, strengths profile, they had lots combined in that 6 months. And at the end, they would be going through the selection partnership. And the VR came in at month 2 when we were looking at self-insights. So they all completed a 360, they all completed a strengths profile, and they've had a debrief around it to already have an initial self-insights session. And then they would come in 30 minutes of virtual reality in a big space, because it's a space where you're walking in the environment, you're not teleporting, and you're observed by a coach. The coach will note down what you're doing and how you're reacting to certain environments. They will note down your self-talk. Are you thinking out loud? Are you quite negative about yourself? Are you positive about yourself? How are you reacting to time pressure, to ambiguity, to impossible tasks? And we put them in really random environments. And the randomness of the environments is on purpose, because typically senior leaders are quite well versed in loads of different situations, and we purposely want to put them outside their comfort zone in environments where they might not have a lot of information. Do they ask questions? How do they interpret certain rules or the lack of rules? Do they make up their own rules, their own boundaries? And I have to say, it's fascinating watching, I mean, lawyers, but also senior leaders from other organizations. We do it in engineering, healthcare, travel recently as well, and seeing different reactions or the assumptions that we make, the authentic behavior that comes out when somebody's a bit more vulnerable is really fascinating. And that's followed up by a coaching debrief, so 60-minute coaching debrief. And what we found is that typically, if you're familiar with coaching, you might have 6 sessions, 8 sessions with someone, and you will get to a deep insight on session 3, session 4. But with this experience, because of the intensity of it, you're getting to a deeper thought or a deeper insight in session number 1, right at the beginning. So it does speed up that coaching cycle process. It does speed up that self-awareness and that insight right from the beginning. And feedback so far has been great. We're rolling it out more and more with this law firm and others. And they've also seen that there's been, I don't think I've included it here, but they've seen a difference at the partnership selection process. The people that did go through had all been through this program. So I'm not saying that VR had the whole, should take the award for that, but I do think it does have a huge impact on raising self-awareness and therefore learning throughout the rest of the program. How long does a project design take, as everything is tailored to their context and needs? Well, it's not always tailored to their context and needs. This one's an interesting one because, for example, this is something that we designed. We might add a logo or something to make it more tailored, but we don't always tailor the environment. This is actually quite we've had it for years now, tried and tested, and it works so well that the only thing that we might tailor to a particular client is if we have an auditorium in there and they want their own slides. And we say, oh, your boss is late, you need to do a presentation, you've got 5 slides, and it's slides from that company, so they might be a bit familiar with it. But typically, we don't tailor it. For EY, it was tailored, and that was quite a new project, and it took about 2-3 months, I would say, but we were working only on that. So the development does take a bit of time. In both cases, were you working with a subject matter expert to design the experiences? And if so, what did the collaboration look like? Yes, so the team that we have, so my boss has experience in assessments, organizational psychology, and my background is coaching and learning and development. So we both work on different products and solutions based on what the need is, and we work with developers. So I don't know how to code. I'm not an expert in Unreal or Unity. We have 2 people at the moment in our team who work in Unreal and who are super skilled in making things look nice, but also work with different types of functionality, which is really impressive. And we come in as the SMEs, I guess, in terms of the learning content or the learning experience. Both cases are blended learning approaches. Would you say this promotes the biggest VR impact? Yes, and great question. And I think is this something that I've put in the later slide?
Yeah,
Oops, let me turn the sound off. I think there was a big trend at one point where they were looking, like especially Meta were looking at Meta universities or whole programs, whole learning experiences just in VR, which firstly, you shouldn't stay in VR for too long. Typically, experiences should be between 20-30 minutes. You can get lost in it. I have stayed in it for much longer because I lost track of time and it was fine. But typically, I wouldn't recommend staying in VR for too long. And you need a bit of reflection beforehand or thinking beforehand. You might want a bit of theory before you go into VR, you experience, you do the doing, and then you reflect on it a bit later, you improve, you change something, and then you come back to it and you try again in VR and you do the doing again. So I think there's something to be said for those different approaches and not just putting everything in virtual reality. You can reflect in virtual reality, but I think combining different approaches will probably have the biggest impact. Here I have a couple of videos, and I won't put the sound on because it's a bit, I don't know why the sound's not coming out great, but I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. The one at the bottom right, actually, with the avatars.
Do I actually look like?
Oh, there we go. Sorry, the sound was coming up. This is one of the groups from EY who were having a conversation post-meeting about how they were going to prep their presentation and how they were going to come up with their solution. It's quite funny to listen to, and they're going through a to-do list and so on. And they're in a hydro dam here. So the topic was around sustainability, so they can play around with the solar panels, with the wind turbines and so on, just to get the creative juices flowing. They don't need to do anything necessarily with it, but that was where one of the meetings was hosted in the hydro dam. Another example, the left corner here, this was an interesting one. This was for cold calling training for apprentices. So I think there's a huge potential. What I really want to try is sales training door to door. I think going in VR, opening a door and dealing with those different types of scenarios would be fascinating, because it's quite a hard thing to train and it's quite a difficult skill to obtain because you're constantly rejected when you do door to door selling. So I think that would be an interesting one. But this one that we tried with cold calling, there was a bit of I think I was initially thinking, why VR? Could we do this on Zoom or Teams? Would it have the same impact? But I mean, I think VR will, well, this is me being biased again. I think it won't do any harm. Like I think it will help. But if you weigh out the costs, does it always balance out? And in this case, I think we were pleasantly surprised, because we had user interface for the manager to role play as a potential client. The apprentice was in VR in this sort of meeting room. The manager could send them notes, ask more questions, slow down, take a deep breath. They could give them confetti, thumbs up, and so on. And the improvement from scenario 1 to scenario 5 was phenomenal. Because we recorded the sessions, it was really, really good to see, and probably something that I didn't quite expect. I thought I would expect some improvement, but because of the intensity of it, it made a huge difference. And I think on Zoom Teams, if you see your company's name, if you see your colleague, if you know that it's not really real, you might not take it seriously, or you might just, you might not put your all into it. Whereas this one, they were really nervous, bless them, but the improvement was phenomenal from scenario 1 to 5. So I think there is something in there as well. The screenshots, Dragon's Den, me presenting something about avatars and Dragon's Den. This last one here is a beach. I love going on the beach when I'm in VR. This is for strengths coaching, where you can bring in your own strengths profile, and you can go in there with a coach, so you can see your avatar. You can see your coach's avatar. We've got lip sync, hand movements. What have I got here? You can have a little breathing exercise. You can light a fire. You can go into the gratitude cave and throw some lanterns up. I'm speeding through it because it is a long video. And this last bit is where you can kind of organize cards. So if you're familiar with coaching and use coaching cards, this will be familiar. It's using cards to organize your strengths. Any questions, any thoughts? I've got 2 slides left. Challenges and recommendations. Could VR be used to replace coaching sessions altogether? Probably not. I think when I use it, I might have an initial conversation with someone on Zoom or face-to-face, if I have the luxury of seeing them face-to-face. And then I might go into VR afterwards. So I think to build that initial, you can definitely build a connection through virtual reality and through avatars, but I think it's just being in VR the whole time would be a bit tricky.
But also, can I ask something related to this question, Lucy? Because I definitely understand the value in training new skills. Like you touch, you move, you shift, you have to fix something, you have to take decisions or react. But with coaching, when you're with your coach one-on-one, I'm not sure if us meeting in VR, face-to-face or on Zoom or whatever will make that much of a difference. Because at the end, we're just talking to each other, right? So I don't know if, or maybe you're asking them to do stuff. I don't know.
Well, no, it's great. It's great because I thought the exact same, and I was a bit skeptical because I thought, well, what's the point? You're just talking, and if you're not really good with that sort of tech, it might strain your eyes, it might not be comfortable, it'll be heavy on your head, it just won't be that enjoyable, might as well do it on Zoom. But what we found, I mean, there's different things. One, for this one, a lot of people appreciated the strengths in action piece. So they were taking their strengths, popping them on the board, organizing them. They were taking, at the end, they have bottles where they say their actions and they throw them in the sea. And so they like that experiential part of thinking about their own strengths. But the second one was the thinking differently. So you're in a different environment, and by default, if you're always in your own space, in your office, on Zoom, there's a distraction piece, actually, that's another benefit, but you're in the same environment, you'll think the same as you usually do. And taking you out of that environment in space, do you think differently when you're on top of the world? Do you think differently when you're in a relaxed environment? How would you think if you have a coconut asking you questions I want to add coconuts to the speech. But, so how does that affect your thinking? And I think so far that's what I've seen people interpreting or thinking a bit differently or maybe a bit more boldly, especially depending on the environments that they're in, because of how either random or different the environment is. And I think there's a case to be made for neurodiversity as well. That's come out a lot, that people that might be autistic or have ADHD find VR, talking to an avatar, not looking at somebody in their eyes, might be a bit more comfortable or safer for those sorts of discussions. Maybe it's something good, but what extent does the VR respond to the actions of the participants? So in the case of the cold calling, if the person is rubbish, is there a different outcome to them being good? Yes, so in this case, it's live. So there's no branching scenario. We have experiences where there are branching scenarios, like you would have typically in e-learning, same principle. In this case, because it's live with somebody talking to you, they give you the feedback straight away. So you have we don't use the thumbs down, to be honest, but we don't want to negatively impact there because they're already a bit nervous, but you've got thumbs up, you've got prompts to recommend what they should do instead. We've got their sales model to remind them of which letters they should be focusing on. So in that scenario, they get feedback from the person with the voice chat, because that person will be in another room with a computer whilst the apprentice is in another room with the headset. So hopefully that makes sense.
And sorry, Lucy, just to piggyback on that, who is the other person?
So in this scenario, it was the manager. So they were pretending to be a client. So it's like
okay.
but just utilizing VR. Yeah. What percentage do you think VR might add to the budget over a different type of capture, like live action video? What percentage? Christopher, that's a That's a difficult question.
Just a ballpark.
It depends on so many things though, because it depends what that VR experience encompasses. It depends what hardware you're using. Are you buying it? Are you renting it? You know, there's and how often are you using it? I think the percentage will probably be higher. Like it will definitely be add more to the budget. I think it's getting better. I mean, now headsets you can buy. It's not my favorite one, the Meta one for organizational learning experiences, but Meta costs £300 in the UK. You can buy them cheaper, has secondhand as well. So it's getting there. I can't give you a percentage. Sorry. But yeah, it will add to the budget. I think it's the cost of reducing though. That was one. If I move to this next slide, one of the challenges that I'd put in there, the cost is getting more affordable, although there's still a reluctance. You know, we're feeling okay to spend money on phones and computers, way more expensive than headsets, and I get it, I know why, but like the hardware, the headset is cheaper than your computer, is cheaper than your phone. So it is really the software development. I think there is a blockage around that, but it's the software development that costs more money typically. I'm just going to look at the other questions before I go through the challenges. In the cold calling scenario, were the responses from the person being called pre-recorded? No, they weren't. Were there multiple options of how they would respond? So yeah, so that's, I guess that was linked to the previous question, but I guess my response answered that it was live with somebody role-playing. Do you have any experience with commands of body movements, for example, with hands? So tell me more about that question, Vesna. Is it with
yes, so that you give commands like, you know, wearing a glove or so, and you touch something or you push the button, for example. Did you use this?
So we don't, I would love to, but we don't really use haptics at the moment. We do use hand tracking. So depending on the environment or how immersive it is, it might feel like you are touching things. It's quite nice when you're in a meeting, you're kind of just swifting through with your finger through different things. But no, we haven't used the gloves yet. Maybe in the future. For soft skills training, we've not felt the need to, because that's what we've focused on. But for technical training, I think loads of organizations do use haptics. Talk to the got questions.
Thank you.
No worries. If there's still time, I'll unmute. Yes. Giuseppe, do you have a question?
Yes. I wanted to ask, what do you think is stopping the development of VR environments? Because for what I see, you mentioned Unreal Engine, you mentioned Unity, what's left of it anyway, and so with those you can create environments that are extremely realistic. I've seen some new videos of the new engine that they're doing with Unreal. It is impressive. I cannot discriminate between reality and created environment. So how comes that in VR, every time I see a VR demo or anything of the sort, the graphics are extremely low to the point where I find it very tough to, you know, feel a connection with it. While I think the only example that I've seen where VR is used in an extremely realistic variant is Half-Life Alyx. It's a game developed by Valve. This is the only example that I've seen. Well, all of the other are very low, but you can create extremely detailed environments. So what's stopping this development? And I'm asking it because I think that especially younger generation that are used to play those games, they put the two graphics on a scale and they feel not very attracted to the low ones, the low poly ones.
Yes, and well, I remember actually, I think it was somebody from EY that said, oh, the graphics are a bit low poly, but she loved it. And she kept talking about how immersed she was and how she forgot that she wasn't in the real world. And so I think, yes, when you see the comparison, of course, when you're in it, I think you forget a little bit. What's stopping, I think, I can't tell you for sure because I don't know, is the honest answer. I think it's probably cost. It does take even low poly environments. If you're building in functionality, it's one thing to build an environment that does nothing and you just walk through it. than an environment that you can interact with, that you can grab objects and do things and throw them around and deconstruct them and whatever you want to do with it. And that's what we've been basing our experience a lot on. It's not something that you experience, you're part of the experience. And adding that functionality takes a bit more time. And I don't know the link with the real environments and how that would work versus maybe lower poly environments.
All right.
Lucy, just looking into the timing, I think it's better if we can wrap up in the meantime. I see there's still a lot of questions, but maybe there we can suggest people reach out to you directly. Lucy, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely. The challenges are boring anyway. We don't want challenges. We just want to give it a try. We want to read the research. We want to take the leap. I'll send those links as well. Actually, I'll do that now. So you have the link in the chat, but feel free to, I love talking about VR. I love sharing ideas and, exploring what could be possible. So absolutely get in touch on LinkedIn, on LinkedIn. I was gonna share something else, but no, LinkedIn. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Then thank you so much, Lucy. This was great. Thank you, everyone who joined us, also for so many questions in the chat. This was wonderful. Yeah, keep an eye on our upcoming events, and you already have Lucy's contact, so feel free to reach out to her if you want to deep dive a bit more on the topic. Thank you, everyone, and wishing you a great rest of the day wherever you are. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Thanks,
questions.
Lucy. Thanks, Anna.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Friends.
Bye.